Franklin. All right, we'll start with Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin's biographical information is a good place to start. Page number? 234. Thank you. Two 234. Anybody see anything interesting in his biographical information? What do we know about literature as a profession during the Revolutionary period?
It was poor. Well,
Not much of it.
it was not.
There wasn't a whole lot of people writing to make a living. Why not?
Expensive.
It wasn't respected.
It was not being paid,
You couldn't get paid unless you were maybe a journalist writing for a newspaper.
and then that's what we say. That's not fair.
And also, there was one other reason why there weren't many professional American writers.
Because
They couldn't pay to have their stuff printed.
Right. If you wanted to be published, you had to pay. Right. And what we know about America in its early stages is that there were not a whole lot of really wealthy people.
Right.
Because if you were really wealthy, you stayed in England or France or wherever you wanted to stay. You didn't abandon your wealth and your mansion to come to this new developing country.
Yeah.
Right? Almost like a second world, maybe even a third world country in places, right? Like that wouldn't make any sense. So Ben Franklin became a very well-known published author. Was that because he was wealthy?
He printed his own stuff out.
He worked at the print shop.
Yeah.
So he got to print his own stuff. That's pretty cool, right? So he had good ideas, he had things he wanted to write about. He was able to do so because he worked at the print shop. It says something too about, based on the fact that he worked at the print shop and he was printing his own stuff, how did he sign his works of literature and his writings? Under other names, pseudonymously, right? He used pseudonyms, fake names. Why? Why did Ben Franklin use fake names? Because not all of it was, stuff that would get him in big trouble. Even his almanacs. I mean, his almanacs weren't necessarily full of controversial material. He did write some things that were controversial. What do you think?
To relate.
Secret? Why would he want to keep his name a secret?
I mean, like, I feel like there's a lot more to Ben Franklin that we don't know. Like, because he was a pretty smart dude.
Right.
He had some clever ideas, and he's just there. What I think, is in my opinion, is that there's a lot of stuff that he did that he probably documented, but didn't want everyone to find out at once. He wants to people to discover.
But I don't know if that fully answers the question why he signed things under a different name.
Like, I don't know, when I read it, when he was a lot younger and he put the piece of paper or whatever on, when he worked for his brother, I feel like his brother would not have printed it if he knew his
Okay.
brother wrote for it.
That's an interesting theory. So it wasn't really his print shop. It was like his brother's print shop, and he was an apprentice, which means he was working under his brother. So maybe his brother would have been like, "Hey, you're wasting my ink. You're wasting my paper. What are you doing?" Right? And you put your name on it, so I know this is yours. Now you're in trouble. That could be part of it. What else, Vincent?
They said his brother has been in jail because he offended the authorities.
That's true. So his brother got in trouble for printing some things that were offensive to the crown.
He didn't want him to be involved in the same.
Okay, so we'll say that's part of it then. We'll say he signed things pseudonymously because if he did write something controversial, he didn't want it to come back to him. But what about the things he wrote that were not controversial? Like a lot of the stuff in the almanac was not necessarily controversial, yet he signed it under a different name. Why might he have done that?
So people would relate to it.
Was he
And
humble and he
and
didn't
he
want
would
the fame?
say, hey.
Okay, possible answer. He was humble and didn't want the fame. Maybe. I think there's another potential explanation. It could have been he was humble and didn't want the fame. Think about it. Back then, if you wanted to get published, you had to have what? If you weren't Ben Franklin, if you didn't work at the print shop,
You had to be independently wealthy.
you had to be independently wealthy. You had to be able to afford it. If you were independently wealthy, there's a decent chance that you were a respected member of the community. A decent chance. Not all wealthy people were respected, but if you held a position of wealth, you probably held a position of respect in society. We'll just make that determination. We'll make that assumption. Professional writers, people who wanted to write for a living, were not respected. So why would it, if Ben Franklin would have written something, not that controversial, just good reading, and signed it Ben Franklin, would anyone want to read it?
No.
Yeah, because they didn't know really who he was or something.
Yeah, who's Ben Franklin is what people would say. Now, if the wealthy guy down the street writes something, you know, if Bill Gates back then wrote something, people might be interested to read it. Like, well, here's a guy that's really successful. Maybe he has something interesting to say. Maybe I can learn from that guy. What am I going to learn from Ben who? Ben Franklin? And then you find out he works at the print shop. Like, oh boy, this guy, like he's using the print shop and writing stuff. Why would anybody respect something written by the guy at the print shop?
Well, what about his
Because
pseudonym
they're
names?
French
Do people know them?
What's that?
The pseudonym names.
No, they were just random names, and like names like Silence Dogood. So maybe that piqued people's interest. Like, I wonder who that is. It
Oh,
doesn't
maybe
even sound
that's-
like a real name.
Maybe that's why though. He give the author interesting names.
Yeah, it creates more interest. People become curious. Ben Franklin was a really good businessman. It says in his biographical information that he would dress up in, what did it say?
Like common or everyday.
Yeah, common everyday clothes. Like, he started making some money, but he took on a very humble persona. Like, it said that he would make sure he was seen pushing his wheelbarrow full of paper around town. even though he became wealthy and successful enough to not have to do that, he wanted to make sure people saw him as humble,
Yeah.
even though he didn't have to do it. So, like, I guess he saw some value in being a man of the people, right? Like, he didn't want to elevate himself, at least in public, over the rest of the people, because his target audience, I suppose, was everyone. So he was a smart businessman. He knew what he was doing. He knew his audience, and he catered to his audience, I would say.
You think that was an act, or you think he was actually a humble human being?
As far as human beings go, I think he was fairly humble. He was, if you read his autobiography, which I don't think was assigned for reading, but it's in the anthology, he was really intent on bettering himself as a person, to the point where he developed a method. And if you look at,
Yeah, I read that somewhere where he'd write down bad things about himself or something every day. Or...
he would pick a character trait, like honesty, for example. I don't know if this is one, but he would pick these different, or character flaws, maybe, like cussing, right? Like, he'd say, it's not a good thing to cuss. I don't want to cuss anymore. I want to make myself a better person, so I'm not going to cuss. Now, he wouldn't just write a New Year's resolution, I'm not going to cuss this year. He would create a chart for every day or every week. And if he caught himself cussing, he would put a mark on the chart for that day. So if he had 10 marks on Monday, his goal was, well, let's see if we can get 8 or fewer on Tuesday. So, like, he methodically did this with a number of character traits, and I'm trying to find the page. There's a picture of it in the textbook, and it's in his autobiography, or at least there used to be. I don't know if it's in this edition or not. There it is. It's on page 302. Oh, and if you go to 301, here are the virtues that he was working on page 301. So temperance or moderation, Eat not to dullness, drink not to elevation. So don't eat too much, don't drink too much. Silence, speak not but what may benefit others or yourself. Avoid trifling conversation. And like these are things from his own autobiography. We can take these, I think, as relatively well-intentioned. I don't think he was just trying to paint himself as this wonderful individual, because if that were the case, he wouldn't have talked about how difficult it was to achieve a higher degree of these virtues. He said, like, it was very difficult. I had problems eating too much or drinking too much or cussing too much. So he seems to be pretty honest about it. But yeah, then you see a picture of the chart of what it may have looked like on the next pages. So he would make those marks either when he was successful or not successful, I forget. But he was very into bettering himself as an individual. I think that's to be respected. I think that shows some humility. He also had an affinity for French prostitutes, for what I've heard. He spent a lot of time in France and got involved with prostitutes over there. So, I mean, if you want both sides of the story, that's the other side of the story.
There was
I
just
suppose.
skeletons in the closet.
I guess it is, yeah. There may have been other things too, but that's just something I've read. And notice it does not say that in your Norton anthology. I don't know why they elected to keep that out. Maybe they didn't feel like it was substantiated enough by other sources, but I've read some fairly reputable sources that say that. It says on page 235, second paragraph, that science was Franklin's great passion. So he was an author, he was a politician, he was a statesman, but maybe most importantly, he was a scientist. And remember, this takes place during the scientific revolution, or the Age of Reason, or the Enlightenment. So he was one of the key figures of the Enlightenment. Maybe you've heard of Ben Franklin as, or maybe you picture Ben Franklin as flying the kite in the storm, right, to develop ideas about the properties of electricity, how lightning works. He was looking for answers, like to even natural phenomena like lightning. He was trying to figure out why. Now, prior to Ben Franklin, what was the answer? Prior to the scientific revolution, prior to the Age of Reason and the Enlightenment, what was the answer? God. Why is there lightning? God, stupid. God wants lightning. So there it is. Ben Franklin wasn't satisfied with that as an answer, and a lot of the people during this time weren't satisfied with that as an answer. You know, if you would have gone to the Puritans and said, why is there lightning? They say, because God wants there to be lightning. Well, what more do you really need to know?
God, quit asking.
Right, so then Ben Franklin comes along and says, no, lightning is actually created because we have masses of humidity that gather in the sky as clouds, and these clouds bump into each other and create friction and electricity, and all of a sudden we have sparks shooting to the ground. Now the Puritans would say, yeah, because God wants there to be big clouds in the sky and friction, and right? So Ben Franklin's searching for answers in that way, though, and that's one of the things that made up his character as a writer. It comes out in his almanac because he was very concerned with weather and things that he could measure and try to prove.
Was he a Christian?
I think Ben Franklin was a deist. So he probably did not believe in Christ as the risen God. Probably not. But you could do some research and find out. I don't want to say conclusively yes or no because I don't know.
One of his quotes, he says, when people ask him about his religion, he says he believes in the creator of the universe.
Right, and that's the deist point of view. There is a creator, there is a God, and as far as Christianity goes, they may even go as far as to say God created Christ. I don't know that the deists would have agreed with a living God in the form of Christ. It said Franklin did?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's because the deists aren't going to deny Christ. I mean, very few people are going to deny the existence of Christ the man, Christ the teacher. Very few people are going to deny that, and the deists didn't, and Franklin didn't, and Franklin looked at Christ as a really good role model, and like his ideas of personal virtue come from Christ, so he was trying to imitate him. Whether or not he believed that Christ is God, I doubt he did. I don't know. You could do some research and find out for yourself, but I think most of the deists would have been in the camp that, no, God created the world and then he was hands off. So, probably not. it does say on 235 some other things about Franklin's beliefs, and it's in the second paragraph, toward the bottom of that picture there on the right. It says, Franklin believed that people were naturally innocent, that all the mysteries that charmed the religious mind could be explained to our advantage, and that education properly undertaken would transform our lives and set us free from the tyrannies of church and monarchy. That's a key guiding principle of the Enlightenment, of the Age of Reason. That answers for everything could be found in science, could be found in observation, could be proven, and could free people from the tyranny of religion or a monarchy. So they saw religions as being tyrannical, which in many ways they were. The Puritans were tyrants with their religion. You believe this way, not that way. You don't get to interpret the Bible for yourself. We'll interpret it for you. And he said, well, if you start to look at things from a scientific point of view, you can find answers that will free you from that type of thinking and those type of institutions. Which is why I said, for this period, science over religion, right? Reason over faith. Democracy over monarchy. So Franklin embodies these ideas. But I think it's interesting, it says that Franklin believed people were naturally innocent. That's in direct conflict with Christianity, isn't it? Believing that people are naturally innocent. Doesn't Christianity claim that people are naturally sinful? Based on nature, based on birth, based on the sins of the father, based on the sins of Adam, based on the fall of man? Yes? No? People, Christianity says that people are naturally sinful, therefore they needed a savior, right?
Yes, because
Okay. So
Catholic believe that there is a natural sin, that everybody born with natural sin.
everybody's born into sin, right?
Yeah.
That's a predominant Christian view. Right, so Franklin's view, though, was in direct contrast to that. He said, no, people are born naturally innocent. So I don't think we could call him a Christian if he's going to take that stance. That does not seem in line with predominant Christian views.
There's an article about him on the Pennsylvania Historical Museum.
What does it say?
You want to pull it up? It's pretty cool.
Just give me a highlight.
Okay, it says that he believes in one God, and then that he governs it by his providence, and that the soul of the man is immortal and will be treated with justice in another life, respecting his conduct and his, and then it just keeps on going. So basically, it's just talking about how there is a God. He
Doesn't go a whole lot further
yeah, it
than
doesn't
that.
go that.
That makes sense. That seems in line with what I've read before. When we get to his actual literature, which starts on page 236, The Way to Wealth, I believe, was assigned to you. Did anybody get to read it yet? The Way to Wealth?
Yeah.
What does he say? He starts talking about taxes, which is interesting because this is where his writing could get kind of dangerous. Because I believe the taxes at this time, well, let's see when it was written. 1733, so definitely prior to the Revolution. So if this was written prior to the Revolution, it's dangerous to talk about taxes, right? And to say that the king taxes us too much. What are his views on taxes?
The people's fault. It's their own fault.
It's the people's fault. How could the taxes be the people's fault?
Because they're allowing themselves to pay any unfair taxes because they feel like they have no choice, they have no option, there's no way out.
Look at page 237. Now he takes on this persona of Poor Richard. Poor Richard was the name of the almanac, so Poor Richard is the name of the narrator of this particular story, but this is just a fictitious persona that he kind of takes on. So he talks about Poor Richard, and here's what Poor Richard says, first full paragraph. The people were kind of complaining, I guess, about the taxes. First full paragraph, 237. Friends, says he, and neighbors, the taxes are indeed very heavy, and if those laid on the government were the only ones we had to pay, we might more easily discharge them. So he says, okay, I agree, people. The taxes are heavy. Yes, we have to pay a lot of taxes. You're right. But we have many others, aside from the ones laid on by the government, he's saying. So yes, the taxes from the government are very heavy indeed. However, we have many others, and much more grievous to some of us. We are taxed twice as much by our idleness, 3 times as much by our pride, and 4 times as much by our folly. And from these taxes the commissioners cannot ease or deliver us by allowing an abatement. So he's saying, you people are complaining. You're saying the taxes are too high. You have to pay the government too much. You have to pay the king too much. You have to pay the governors too much money out of your own paychecks. But you're taxed twice as much by your idleness. What is your idleness?
Not doing nothing.
You're not doing anything. You're complaining you don't have enough money. Work more is what he says, right? Stop complaining about the taxes and work harder. Make more money.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Is that a fair argument?
Yep.
I'll tell you why it's fair coming from Ben Franklin, because he was a hard-working guy. He practiced what he preached in his almanacs and in his advice. And he ended up being pretty prosperous and wealthy, and he came from a position where he wasn't. So he was speaking from a position of experience and success, even though he was speaking through a narrator that wasn't him. But this advice seems to be sound advice, at least based on his personal experience. Do you think that that advice still is true today?
Dave Ramsey.
Okay. So you would agree that we are taxed twice as much by our idleness?
Heck yeah.
Anybody disagree?
Unless your idleness paying you money.
I think it's cool. Out of
Do
our
people
courts.
do people continue to complain? Because this is almost 300 years later.
Yes.
After this was written, do people still complain about the taxes being
Yes.
too high?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And there's people who don't even contribute to it.
Yeah.
Anybody that buys a Big Mac contributes to taxes because you pay sales tax, which is a form of tax. Anybody that spends any money in this country is paying into the tax pool. Even if you don't bring in an income, you're still paying taxes. What is it? 6% in Hall County? 6 or 7%. Varies by county, it seems like, right? It's not a big deal when you buy your 99-cent value menu, right? When it's $1.05 instead of 99 cents, people don't really seem to worry too much about it. But when you have to buy a car, that's $1,000 maybe.
I guess.
That's a sales tax. That's going to the government. So anybody that spends money is paying taxes. Everybody's a taxpayer. And if you get to the point of buying a large purchase, you may be tempted to complain about the taxes, right? So it continues today. So is Franklin's advice still good for us? Because what he's saying is, stop complaining about the taxes and work harder. Are taxes a necessity?
Yep.
Then why do some people complain so much about them if they're a necessity?
Because they need something to complain about.
Yeah, human beings tend to complain a lot, don't they?
So without complaining, we wouldn't be a foreign society.
Well, here's another question, Arthur. Without complaining, what would happen to the taxes? If people didn't speak out and say that they're too high, what might happen?
It'll go higher.
Probably get higher and higher until people did complain, right?
Mm-hmm.
Until they really were maybe the ultimate cause of our misery.
Well, also Franklin, I think when he said to work harder, I think he's just saying the more money you have, like the more money you save up and the more you work for, taxes might get lower for that. Think
And-
about it. Because the more you can contribute to the country or whatever, they should notice and they should be like, all right, he's doing a lot. We should at least cut him some slack.
And in some ways, and today, in today's society, in some ways that's true, and in some ways it's the exact opposite. So if you make under $50,000, your tax bracket is going to be 15%. Okay, if you make over $1 million, your tax bracket is going to be 39%. So in some ways, the more you make, the more taxes you pay out of each dollar. It's called progressive tax rate. So some people argue, no, it should be a flat tax. Everybody should pay 20% out of every dollar, regardless of how much a person makes. Now, where it gets complicated is usually the person that makes $1 million on their first $50,000, they're paying 15% just like everybody else. So it's not like their first $50,000 is getting taxed at 39%. Usually that's taxed at the 15% that everybody pays on their first $50,000. Does that make sense? But as a society, we have agreed by majority rule, democracy, because that's how our government works, that a person making over $1 million, or I think it's over $300,000 now or something, can afford to pay 39 cents out of every dollar. Whereas a person that's only making $20,000 can't afford to pay 39 cents out of every dollar. So we don't tax them at that rate. Does that make sense? But this idea of taxes is important, and we can, this is open to class discussion. It's open to a common thread in your essays. It's open to your final presentation. But taxes is important when we're talking about government, and especially in these early time periods, it's important. Franklin's mentioning it here, but what kind of things do we want from our government? What do we want them to pay for? What don't we want them to pay for? Who do we want to support? Who do we not want to support? That's the question, because it all comes down to money, right? It costs money to run a country and have a government. But most of you seem to agree that we're taxed twice as much by our idleness and we should just stop complaining and work harder. So what's a fair tax rate then?
I'd prefer a flat tax.
Of what?
I don't know, about 15%.
Flat tax of 15%. So if I'm making $10 million a year, I should pay $1.5 million in taxes.
No,
You work
you
for
should
it,
pay
you deserve it.
5%.
5%.
Like Tommy's over here.
Well, 15 is less than we pay now.
Depends on the person.
I pay about 30%. It's all said and done.
What's the difference between a flat tax and a fair tax?
It won't mean nothing.
Difference between flat tax and fair tax.
Flats across the board.
What's
No matter
fair
how
tax?
much.
Isn't fair
Some
tax
of
like,
that's equally.
you have to
Y'all
pay
need to know this.
a very large percentage on sales tax, and then that's the only thing that is taxed.
That's the fair tax, right?
Yes.
I think you're right. Place all federal income taxes with an across-the-board sales tax. Okay, so instead of getting taxed on your income, the money that you bring in, you get taxed on your outgo, whatever you spend on. So they would just raise the sales tax to, let's say, 25%. So you don't have to pay, and I'm just pulling a number out of the air, you don't have to pay any more income tax. Government gets 0 of your dollars until you decide to spend those dollars. They call it a fair tax. That's an interesting rhetorical choice, right? Who is going to be opposed to the fair tax?
I am.
What's the percentage on it?
I don't know, 20, 25%, 20%.
So you gonna pay more doing that than if they just tax your income?
Who is going to pay more doing that?
Me?
Why?
No, I'm asking, like, what's the percentage?
You're asking the right question. Let's just, it doesn't matter what the percentage is. Let's pretend it's 20%.
If it's less than what I'm already getting taxed, then yeah, I'd be all for it.
Let's use some hypothetical numbers. Let's say you make $50,000 a year, and the government is currently taxing you at 20%. That's what, $10,000, right?
Yeah.
Let's say you make $50,000 and the government stops taxing your income, and we're going to go with this idea of a fair tax. And now you're going to pay 20% on every dollar you spend. How much of your $50,000 a year are you spending?
You're spending
Most people that are in lower income brackets are spending all of their income.
Yeah.
Most people don't save a lot of money. I mean, it's hard to. When you don't make a lot of money, it's hard to save money. It's hard to invest money. Now, the guy that's making $1 billion a year, do you think he's spending $1 billion a year?
No, he's investing it. He's investing in this company. He's investing in Shark Tank.
And the idea with the fair tax is usually they don't have to pay any taxes on the money they invest. Think about it. I could, if I made $1 million a year, I could live your same lifestyle, right? It costs you $50,000 a year to live. If I wanted to, if I didn't want to spend a lot of money, I could live at $50,000 a year, and none of my money above that gets taxed. $0. So I guess the argument against the fair tax is that it unfairly punishes poor people because they're having to, all of their dollars get taxed, whereas a wealthy person, their cost of living is not going to necessarily equal their income. They can adjust it to do
That's what
that.
that's what that, other tax would be.
Say
Flat
again?
rate. Flat rate would punish, I wouldn't say punish.
Well, punishes, if you feel like someone taking your money without your permission is punishment, then you can use that
I
term.
wouldn't say punish, the people who make $300,000, if it's a flat rate, you know, they get to keep the majority of it, but you're still stuck as a middleman,
Right,
which is another issue that's going on in the country, because there is no middleman right now.
right. So, what we have now is progressive taxation. Many people are opposed to it because they think,
They don't think about it. They don't put two and two together, like all these McDonald's workers say, I wanna make $15 an hour.
Right.
Blah, blah, blah. You don't think about everything else is about to go up, because you want that one decision.
right.
People don't put two and two together.
But does everything, okay, so the minimum wage argument, that's a related subject. Does everything else have to go up? If companies, like, I don't know.
Yes.
For example, I'll take Walmart. Let's say Walmart's making in profits after they pay their employees, after they pay for everything. Walmart is making $1 billion a year. Just, we'll say that. That's pure profit. That's for the Walton family? What's the name of the family that owns Walmart? Walton? We'll say the Walton family is making $1 billion a year. Do they really have to increase the cost of their products to pay their workers more? If after paying their workers already they're making $1 billion? Let's say raising the wages of Walmart employees to $15 an hour is going to cost $300 million a year to Walmart, but they're already making $1 billion in profit. Well, they could make $700 million in profit and pay their employees more and not have to touch the prices of the products.
But they're not gonna do that.
They're not going to do that.
McDonald's dollar menu is gonna go out the door.
Well, McDonald's is a bad example because McDonald's
McDonald's
is
has found
dying
a
as a
way
business right now
to run
anyway.
all of their stores on poor employees.
Those are the ones who are typically
Say it
the ones
again?
who are.
McDonald's has found a way, because I know some people that own like 30 of them,
Mhm.
has found a way to run every single store with a maximum of 4 employees.
Mhm.
Everything's electronic.
That is true, but those are the people who want the $15 an hour.
But they're all gonna lose
Fast
their
food.
jobs.
Well, let's
Somebody's got to make the electronics. Somebody's got to make the robots, right? So yeah, you're right. You'll lose some low-end workers, but somebody's got to make those products to replace them.
You're right.
But the idea is, so if the argument against raising the minimum wage is that it's going to raise costs, and there have already been studies done. And see, the problem with economics and economic research is there's always an agenda behind the people that are doing it. It seems like you can't find any really good unbiased research. But I've seen studies that say, okay, in Europe, they pay their employees a lot more at a fast food restaurant, and that the equivalent raise in cost is only pennies because they sell so many Big Macs, so they really don't have to raise the Big Mac to $6. They raised it from $3 to $3.14, and they sell so many Big Macs that was enough to raise the people's wages a significant amount. Now you'll see research that tries to prove otherwise and can do it with numbers. So it's a pretty muddy issue, but if you have major profits from a business, those profits could be less and you could pay the people more. Or the people could say, no, we like our profits. We don't want less profits. We're going to raise the prices. So it's kind of up to the people that are running the business what they want to do. If the business is profitable. If it's a business that's surviving on slim profit margins, then yeah, they've got to jack up the prices if they're going to pay people more. There's no doubt about that. But we do have companies, especially major companies like Walmart, I'm just picking on them because they're such a big company. They make tons of money. Do they have to pay their people more? That's a question for society to decide, I guess. See, here's the problem too. I feel like I'm on a soapbox now, but here's the deal with minimum wage. There are people that work minimum wage jobs in this country 40 hours a week, 39 hours a week actually now, or 29 hours a week, because once you hit 30, you're considered full-time and the company has to pay you benefits. So there are people who work maybe 2 part-time jobs. They're working between the two jobs 40, 50 hours a week, and they're not making enough to support their families. And guess what happens? When you don't make enough to support your families, you usually apply for government aid, and you get welfare. These are people who work. Now, some people that collect welfare and collect government benefits don't work, but a lot of them do. If a person is working 2 part-time jobs because they can't find a full-time job, they're working 40 to 50 hours a week, and they're collecting government assistance, guess who's paying their salary? We are. Shouldn't Walmart be paying their salary? But that's not what's happening. So that's one of the arguments for raising the minimum wage, is that we're already paying it. You know, like, we're not paying it by paying more for our Big Mac. We're paying it because it's money out of our taxes that goes to these people. Does that make sense? So it's got to come from somewhere.
It would be fine if it went to people, I don't know, that's
Like,
Step on them because
I would be fine if it went to,
people who worked.
no, to people who really, really help
Like-
people, like cops,
I
Right.
only make
firefighters,
Right.
army.
$50 an hour.
I'd be perfectly fine with all of that money going to them.
Right,
They're really making a difference.
right.
But I just,
Are you okay with money out of your paycheck going to someone who works 2 part-time jobs, 50 hours a week, to support their family?
yes.
I mean, that's a dedicated worker.
I'd much rather.
But
go
you
to-
think
I
it's
don't
your
know.
responsibility to pay these people, not McDonald's responsibility?
I mean, look.
Why should Sod have to pay this person? They're working hard. Shouldn't their employer be paying them?
How much are they gonna pay them? Like $1, probably.
I don't know. Enough that you don't have to pay them
The
anymore?
ones who don't work.
What's
Those are
that?
the ones I'm upset with, the ones who don't work.
That's
Right.
who we pay.
And what percentage of people who collect benefits aren't working?
A lot.
85%.
But what is the number? We could look it up.
I've met, I don't know.
We could look it up, and that's
I
the
worked
thing.
I worked at retail with a girl who obnoxiously threw in my face the fact that she only worked so many hours a week, and then she took her welfare card or whatever and went and bought lobster for her, and then she had her cell phone, and she had her Gucci bag, and then all this other stuff, and I wanted to punch her in the throat.
And but that's one person. I mean, how many people are out there working?
Don't get me on my soapbox.
How many people? That's one person, right? But we have to be careful. We can't generalize based on one person, right? I mean, there are literally millions of people collecting government benefits, and I'm speaking just to the poor people because we already argued about government benefits going to rich people too, right? In the form of tax breaks. So if there are millions of people out there, I mean, that's one person. Maybe there are a lot of hardworking people out there that just don't make it known that they're collecting benefits because they're not proud of it.
Yeah, my parents.
I mean, we're not going to hear from those people. They're not going to be the ones in your face talking about, the benefits that they collect. Go ahead, Madeline.
Like, when the economy crashed in 2008, my dad was a brick salesman. He lost his job, we lost our house. We had to collect benefits, but he still went out there and got a job, and we didn't tell anybody that until
Right.
like years after that.
Right. And see, the problem is that, so if you argue that we should cut welfare benefits, it's going to harm those people
I'm not
too.
saying we cut welfare benefits, I'm saying they go through maybe a lengthier process
Right.
to prove they're trying. Like she said, he was still going out and looking for a job and things like that. To prove you're trying, prove you're doing stuff.
Yes, and since Bill Clinton's administration, they implemented welfare, work for welfare requirements. You can't collect unemployment anymore. You can't collect most welfare benefits unless you prove that you're looking for work. They won't pay you unless you can prove that you've submitted applications and you've gone to interviews. You can't collect anything. That was put into place in the 90s.
Seems like that's
Yeah, but you can get around that. I've done that for about a year.
You can circumvent any rule that's put in place, and
Yeah.
and I don't think that we're ever going to have a perfect system. But I guess the question you need to ask yourself is, how perfect of a system are we going to get? How imperfect of a system are you willing to accept? There are always going to be people that are going to exploit the system.
Cheat the system, yeah.
But at what point do you say, well, shut the system down because the system is supporting children?
Again, if you shut the system down, it's all going to go chaos.
Right.
Well, wait, hold on. Doesn't the government shut down finance sometimes? Like, and then there's no like that's everyone goes, oh, the government's gonna shut down. There's gonna be chaos. There's not really much any chaos.
Well, it
unless
depends who you are. If you're one of the select, they call it, I can't think of the name they use, like non-critical employees. Like the government will just stop paying non-essential employees. So like people that aren't tasked with like securing the borders, like, you know, they're not going to say like, okay, well, the government shut down, you're a government employee, like you're you know, supposed to go to work tomorrow and keep the border safe. Sorry, we're shut down, don't go to work. That's not how it works. They pick certain portions of federal government workers, like maybe you're in charge of the federal parks, like the Jefferson Monument, they'll close that down. So the guy that's in charge of taking tickets at the Jefferson Monument, he doesn't get a paycheck because he's a non-essential employee. He's not essential to the security of the country. But guess what? That paycheck is pretty essential to him and his family. So it's not chaotic to the country as a whole, but to that guy's family, you know, that guy that got a job working at the Jefferson Monument, it's pretty chaotic in his house, you know, when that government shuts down. So yeah, it doesn't affect most of us, but it affects a lot of people. I mean, the federal government employs many people in many different branches. Some of them they consider essential to the country, like not getting blown up. But others, Jefferson Monument guy, not essential when the government shuts down. Does that make sense? So yeah, not chaotic as a whole, but to some people it is. All right, so Franklin and taxes will be on the quiz. That's why I mentioned it. Trying to see if there's anything else on Franklin. His biographical information, which we talked about, will be on the quiz. Did we see something in Franklin speaking about the Native Americans?
Yep.
You got a page for that by any chance?
244.
Concerning the savages of North America. Interesting rhetorical choice. Savages. Interesting rhetorical choice. Especially based on the content of the selection here. If you want to focus on Native Americans or racism as a common thread in literature, the word savages is close to equivalent, not equivalent, but it's close to the N-word. It's a derogatory word. It's in the same family anyway. It has similar intent. And if you go back to Roger Williams, he talks about the Native Americans and what they preferred to be called.
They're like Indians.
I'm pretty sure it was Indians. But he says, I mean, sometimes labels are important. Sometimes names are important. Sometimes they're just words. But, you know, go walk down the hallway shouting out the N-word and see how important words can be, right? Roger Williams.
I think he also said the natives, even when they heard the word Indian, it was unfamiliar.
There was something in the
People,
ears.
you know, that's the tribe down there, that's so-and-so over there.
Right. Williams gets specific about it. That's the only reason I'm trying to go back to him right now. It's on page 104. Page 104, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs down. First, those of the English giving as natives, savages, Indians, wildmen, so the Dutch called them wildmen, aborigine men, pagans, barbarians, heathen. So those are the names which the Europeans give the Native Americans. All right, those are the different things they call them: natives, savages, Indians, wildmen, aborigine, pagans, barbarians, heathen. Secondly, the names they give themselves. So they have their own names for their own tribes. He says, I cannot observe that they ever had, before the coming of English, French, or Dutch amongst them, any names to difference themselves from strangers, for they knew none. But two sorts of names they had, and amongst themselves. First, general, belonging to all natives. Secondly, particular names peculiar to several nations amongst themselves. And then here's the interesting part, I guess. Next paragraph. They have often asked me why we call them Indians, natives, etc., and understanding the reason, they will call themselves Indians in opposition to English, etc. So it looks like, based on what Roger Williams is telling us, they're okay with being called Indians. But it doesn't appear, and I'm making an assumption here, I've got to jump to this assumption, that they're not okay with heathens, savages, barbarians, etc. Right? But it says they prefer Indians because the term Indians just comes from the fact that Christopher Columbus thought he was in a geographical area called India. And they're like, okay, we're cool with that. You're going to call us based on where you think you are, or a geographic region, okay. But they were able to understand the implications of savages, barbarians, and heathen. And it doesn't look like, this is my assumption, it doesn't look like they approved of that. Does that make sense? Alright, back to Franklin. I'm sorry, I lost my page on Franklin. 244. So, in this selection concerning these savages, what Franklin is doing is comparing and contrasting the Europeans to the Native Americans. He starts out by saying, savages we call them because their manners differ from ours, which we think the perfection of civility. They think the same of theirs. So what he's saying is, we as Europeans, we think we are just the most civilized people that there could ever be. However, the Native Americans think the same of themselves. So here's one group looking internally at themselves saying we are the model of civility. Here's the other group saying the same thing. It says, perhaps if we could examine the manners of different nations with impartiality, we could find no people so rude as to be without any rules of politeness, nor any so polite as to not have some remains of rudeness. That seems like a pretty nuanced approach. Like you're looking at these two groups of people and you're trying to determine, okay, which of these groups is civilized? And he's saying, you're never going to find a group of people that don't have any rules of etiquette and politeness. And you're never going to find any groups of people that don't have some hint of rudeness and incivility. Does that make sense? He says the Indian men when young are hunters and warriors, when old counselors, for all their government is a council of the sages. There is no force. Alright, so he compares these two groups of people, and what conclusion do you think he comes to? What did you see?
We're different.
We're different? Anything?
What you value, we value other things.
Does he come to an opinion on which group is more or less civilized?
More or less civilized? No, I just read pretty much how he looks at the differences where, they offered them to educate theirs, and he's like, we tried that. But when they came back with us, they were good for nothing, is what they said.
Right. He tells the story of how the Europeans made an offer to the Native Americans and said, we will take some of your Native American boys and we will educate them for you. And the Native Americans turned it down because they said, we have sent some other boys to be educated, and you sent them back to us, and they couldn't hunt, they couldn't cook, they couldn't, what else could they
Speak our language.
They couldn't speak our language. He basically said, you turned them into girls. Like, you made them soft. Like,
they said it humbly, though.
They did. They said it humbly. They weren't trying to be insulting, and that's part of I think the overall impression that Franklin leaves us with is that these people are far less insulting and rude and maybe far more civilized than the Europeans. But he finishes that story about the education, and the Native Americans say, thanks but no thanks. And they didn't just make, where does it say it?
What if you bring some of yours,
right.
on our side?
Yeah, he says, thanks but no thanks. However, if you would like to give us some of your English boys, we will make men out of them for you. Yeah. Like Eloy said, it doesn't appear that they were trying to be insulting, but they're saying, like, we see what your education does to your people, and it makes them no good for us. Like, your education will not do anything to help our people be good with our culture and our society. But we'll make some men out of yours for you. But they didn't make the decision right away, and this is an interesting cultural thing. It's on page 244. After the principal business was settled, the commissioners from Virginia acquainted the Indians by a speech that there was at Williamsburg College with a fund for educating Indian youth, and that if 6 nations would send down half a dozen of their young lads to that college, the government would take care that they should be well provided for and instructed in the learning of the white people. It is one of the Indian rules of politeness not to answer a public proposition on the same day that it is made. So if someone asks you something, if I say, Eloy, do me a favor, could you please escort my daughter to her dance? It would be rude for Eloy to say, okay, sure, right away. And here's what it says. It says, they think it would be treating it as a light matter. So if he were to just answer right away, it'd be like, well, that wasn't a very serious request. So instead, the Native Americans say, we're going to defer our answer, and we will tell you tomorrow. So they see it as being polite and giving more weight and substance to the request by refusing to answer right away, like, appreciate your request, let me think about it, let me sleep on it, let me come back to you with an answer. So that's kind of interesting. Like, and when I think about American culture today, if you send a text message to someone, what is your anticipation of response time? Text message?
30 minutes.
If it's been a minute, I'm like, come on, dude.
Like,
I know you're not doing anything right now. It's Saturday. I know you've got your phone next to you because we all do. Unless you're in class, right? You're not supposed to be texting. But for the most part, isn't the anticipation of a response in a text message pretty fast? And I think that translates into our expectations for responses, even if they're verbal, even if they're by email or by phone. Like, seriously, has someone ever said, let me take some time to consider your question and get back to you?
Well,
And
job
it-
interviews, they do.
yeah.
Okay, job interviews do, that's true. Because you know they're taking it seriously, right? Well, like, how many people in your circle of friends or family have ever said to you, like, that's a good question, let me think about it for a while and get back to you? It doesn't seem like it happens as often, at least, as it would have in the Native American culture back then. And I think that's interesting. I think that shows maybe a higher degree of civility than we have today, at least. I don't know about the Europeans back then, but I think that's interesting. I think that's something we can take away from the literature. Like we talked at the beginning of the semester about this making us better people and, you know, making us more in tune with humanity. Well, there's a lesson right there from the literature we can take away. Maybe the next time somebody asks you something important, don't answer right away. And don't tell them it's because you don't want to answer. Just say, that's a really serious question. Let me think about it and I'll come back to you with an answer. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, right? Unless it's an answer that needs an immediate response, but this doesn't seem to be an example of a question that needed an immediate response. Alright, what else does it say? Go to page 245. It's the third paragraph, the politeness. The politeness of these savages, and I think it's just kind of ironic he uses the term savages, but the politeness of these savages, because a savage, by definition, can't be polite, right? The politeness of these savages in conversation is indeed carried to excess. So it's almost like they're too polite. Since it does not permit them to contradict or deny the truth of what is asserted in their presence. So if somebody says a lie, like they're so polite they won't call someone out on it. They'll just let that person continue speaking. By this means they indeed avoid disputes, but then it becomes difficult to know their minds or what impression you make upon them. The missionaries who have attempted to convert them to Christianity all complain of this as one of the great difficulties of their mission. The Indians hear with patience the truths of the gospel and explain to them and give their usual tokens of assent and approbation. You would think they were convinced. No such matter. It is mere civility. So these people are trying to convert the natives. The natives are saying, okay, yes, okay, that sounds great, wonderful. The people think they've done their job in converting them, but that's not necessarily the case. Talks more about
Shows more
Christianity. It shows more civility, you think?
Yeah, that add on to it. You know, sometimes, you know, my masturbate is arguing with someone. It's like,
Right.
I know you're wrong, but okay, keep going.
Right, just let people talk,
Yeah.
right? Let them finish.
Yeah.
You ever hear of giving someone enough rope to hang themselves? You
Yeah.
hear that expression?
Yeah.
Sometimes that's the best way to, I don't want to say win an argument, but you know, if your goal is to win an argument, sometimes just let the other person talk. Let them keep going. especially if it's in front of an audience, if there's a third-party observer, sometimes you just let it go. Sometimes I'll have to let a student just keep talking, right? If I know my viewpoint is right and theirs is wrong, sometimes I just want the student to keep going, because eventually, even if they don't come to the conclusion themselves, usually everybody else in the room will, right? They'll think, wait a minute, this person's talking in circles, this person's not making any sense. That's good advice right there. Sometimes just let people talk. All right, here's some interesting information too on 246, second paragraph. When any of them come into our towns, I wonder who them is here.
The Indians.
Yes, you're right. The Indians. When any of the Indians come into our European English towns, when any of them come into our towns, our people are apt to crowd around them, gaze upon them, and incommode them, where they desire to be private. Like, that's true, right? Like, here's a weird person, let's go look. Right? Here's someone that's different. Let's go check them out. Not a whole lot of respect for privacy. Do you think that, and remember, this is 300 years ago, do you think that as a culture, as a Eurocentric American culture, we are still that way? Do we invade people's privacy as a culture?
Cows come out.
Have you all ever seen TMZ?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I know.
Oh, you're familiar with it. So you know that there is an entire industry in our country dedicated to invading people's privacy, right?
Only the famous people.
Only what?
Only the famous.
Only the famous people.
Only
But
because we're just craving to know what they do on their
not just the famous people. How about Facebook? I mean, aren't we very interested in other people's lives? Like,
well, I mean, Facebook's more like, hey.
kind of
what do you
voluntary
do?
people
It's
put
kinda
it out
like
there
you-
anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of like you can do whatever you want, but TMZ's more like, what did they do?
Right.
What did you do in the weekend?
Right.
What are you doing this hour? Who are you texting? Like, they have no privacy whatsoever. They catch you, you're done.
Right.
You better run. That's how bad it is.
If you're you're right though, people are interested in the weird and the different and everything. Everyone's interested in that.
Take like
viral
like
on
the
Facebook.
19 and Counting, the Duggars Family show.
Oh, yeah.
They weren't really
Yeah.
famous until people started watching their show. But people only started watching their show because they were interested in someone that was different. Like, they wanted to crowd around and like, oh, let's look at these people. Now, it was in front of a TV as opposed to, you know, violating their privacy in person. And they did sign up to do the show. So like, but I think this idea of privacy and what one culture values over what a different culture values, very different, right? Native Americans value privacy. The English, the Europeans did not. And it seems like 300 years later, it hasn't changed a whole lot. Maybe it's gotten worse. Maybe now it's not only do we don't only not respect other people's privacy, but we're willing to let people not respect our privacy. We're willing to put ourselves online with all types of personal information. So it's kind of interesting. Maybe it's gotten even worse. He keeps going here. So that all the people gather around. Therefore, as soon as they arrive within hearing, they stop and hollow. So now he's talking about the Native Americans. Here's what they do. Because they respect privacy, when they arrive within hearing distance of a town, a Native American town, they stop and they yell, remaining there until they're invited to enter. That seems polite, right? Kind of like knocking on the door before you're just walking into someone else's town. He's talking about walking from like one town that's not your own into another, right? Like I can walk from here to, I would hope I wouldn't, but Gainesville, I hope somebody give me a ride. But I could without announcing myself, right? Like I wouldn't have to stop at the city limits of Gainesville and be like, hey, I'm here, is it okay if I come in? Like the English, the European didn't really have a sense of that, whereas the Native American communities, because it was a totally different culture, if you were one Native American going from one place to another and passing through a village or a town or whatever their little settlements were, you would announce yourself. That seems polite, right? It would be weird though if somebody came to the city limits of your town and was like, hey, is it okay if I come on in?
You would think they were weird then.
You would.
Like, you'd be like, there's something about you that's just sketchy.
Yeah,
Would, and the
why
Euro-
can't you come in? Why do you think you can't come in?
Right, but the Europeans were looking at the Native Americans and saying, wow, that's really weird.
Well, I think, and the fact, like, well, now if someone did that, it'd be pretty weird, but back then, the Native Americans, they're just showing respect. It's like stepping into your house. You're not just gonna invite yourself in.
Right.
You're gonna be like, can I come in? And then you give them the opportunity.
Interesting cultural practice. How many people, because I've seen this across different cultures, how many people remove your shoes when you enter a house? If you visit someone else's house, will you take your shoes off? Just like automatically without asking?
Well, I look at their feet first. If
You
they're-
look at what they do?
Yeah, I'm looking at their feet first. If I'm walking into their house, I'm gonna look at their feet just to be
Just to
sure.
see what they do?
Just to see if they're wearing shoes or not. I
Right.
mean, one person could be wearing shoes, but that doesn't mean the other people aren't. So I should.
Mhm.
Like, I look at the majority of what they're wearing, and then I'll be like, all right, I need to take off my shoes.
Interesting cultural practice. Like I just grew up and that was never part of my culture or the cultures that I was with. And like, you know, then I moved down south. I wasn't sure if it was a southern thing, but then I saw it from like different cultural groups. So I can't make sense of it.
We have to take off our shoes with the matter.
Why?
Somebody's
Do you know why? Is it just tradition?
I, with the Japanese, it's interesting, they do it because, when you walk outside, it's passed up with
Right.
spirits or, you know, the tainted world outside, you keep your home clean.
So less about physical hygiene and more about just a spiritual belief.
Mhm.
Southern hospitality.
I knew that had something to do with it, but there's also people that think like,
Japanese always put it
there's
back.
also practical reasons like don't track dirt into my house, right?
Yeah.
Like some people do it just for the physical dirt that are on shoes, but in some cases it's cultural. So that's why like I can't make sense of this practice because some people are doing it for one reason, other people are doing it for another reason. Some people do it, some don't.
But then it could be about the Christmas tree thing.
Yeah, just because that's the way we've always done
Yeah.
it. Yep. Kind of interesting.
Oh,
Does
yeah,
anybody
right,
know
yeah,
any
yeah,
other
yeah.
background
Yeah,
behind
yeah.
removing shoes when you enter someone's home or enter your own home? Martine, you said you did it why? Just because?
Yeah, my mom. always
Yeah.
said take off your shoes, so I took off my shoes.
Yeah,
I think
Southern
s-
I
hospitality.
don't know.
I
It's
mean,
not there.
we all take off our shoes when I get home. My mom's a clean, like,
Yeah.
she's like, get dirt in that house, I will whoop you.
So it's not some kind of
Like, I will throw you out with your bed and everything. I don't care. Like, you better not bring dirt in that house.
so it's strictly a physical dirt issue, like it's not any kind of belief or respect thing.
Well, I mean, she does like having people not have their shoes because she thinks if you just come in with your shoes and you're stepping all over the place, you don't respect anything she's put on the floor or you're just like.
But it goes back to the idea of it could be soiled and it could get dirty, so
Yeah.
that's the lack of respect there.
Yeah. Someplace I think like, I don't know, someplace you show the soles of your feet to someone, very disrespectful.
Really?
You will
Yeah.
be beaten.
Uh-huh.
I read about that.
You do
That's
not
pretty
show the
interesting.
soles of your feet.
Okay, now that I'm off track, back to the Native Americans. Okay, so they holler outside of a town before they enter. Two old men usually come out to them and lead them in. That's kind of a nice thing to do. Like, let's send someone out there to escort this person in.
Did they do this with other tribes too, or just colonists?
This part right here is only referring to the Native Americans within Native American communities. Now, I don't know if it was
Okay.
cross tribes or just within tribes. I don't know, but it seems to imply that it's like if they go from one Native American village to another, this is how they would behave. There is in every village, this is a Native American village, a vacant dwelling called the stranger's house. Here they are placed while the old men go around from hut to hut acquainting the inhabitants that strangers are arrived, who are probably hungry and weary, and every one of them sends what he can spare of victuals and skins to repose on. So they bring in this newcomer from outside, put him in a house, a dwelling. They send people out to get him. Then they go around from hut to hut, or teepee to teepee, or house to house, collecting food for this individual, and bring it to the person.
Oh,
That's pretty awesome.
Wish that happened every time we entered a new place.
Yeah, definitely. Especially when we go to like nice warm beaches and nice vacation places. That'd be wonderful.
I kind of don't want to
Okay,
wait
8 bucks.
that
Where
long for
there-
me to get greedy.
Okay.
Like, if I go to a beach, I'm not going to stand there and be like, hey, can I come in?
Right.
Like, I'm right there. I can just kind of walk in.
Right.
How far apart were the villages?
Don't know.
Because I feel like if you're going from one to the other, it's probably like a long journey.
Yes.
So when you get there, you just want to rest. I guess.
Yes. You want to rest and you want to eat, definitely. But even when we go on vacation today, you have to drive far or take a flight. Like when you get there, you want to rest and eat, right? All right. So continuing with the Native Americans, here they are placed in the stranger's house, while the old men go around from hut to hut collecting food. When the strangers are refreshed, so when they've rested, when they've eaten, pipes and tobacco are brought, and then, but not before, conversation begins with inquiries who they are, whither bound, what news, etc. And it usually ends with offers of service. They don't even ask these people who they are, where they're coming from, or what they want until after they get them food, drink, rest, and then they start the conversation. That seems highly respectful.
There's a lot of places that still do.
Have you ever seen like in movies where you have, especially movies that maybe take place in the past, or like I'm thinking like maybe Lord of the Rings or something.
Yeah.
Like Frodo is traveling with his
Sam.
friends.
Sam.
He's traveling with Sam, and I think the two twins.
Right.
What are the two boys' names? The ones that are troublemakers. They always get in trouble. Somebody, anybody.
Merry Pippin.
Yeah.
Merry Pippin. All right, so they're traveling and they go to this inn, right? They go to the inn to meet the stalker guy or striker, or whatever his name is. They go to the inn. They knock on the door. They open up like a little window.
Yeah.
Who are you? What do you want? Right? Like it's the exact opposite of the Native Americans. Like it's like you need to declare yourself first. You need to tell us who you are, what you want, before we even consider letting you in. The Native Americans, on the other hand, are we're going to let you in. We're going to take care of you. Then we'll figure out what you need and what you want and who you are. Totally different way of going about things. What's the downside?
Who knows who you
Um,
are?
Who knows who you are and what you want, right?
Like
Like,
keeping a watch too.
right.
I'm pretty sure when you walk in, or someone comes into your community, everyone else is like looking at you, so they're not looking at you, they're looking
Into
at the
what?
stuff you bring.
Into what community though?
Like if natives came into someone's town.
Into another native's town?
Yeah. They're
But
gonna-
that's only because of the cultural practices they have in place. So if your argument against this cultural practice is that it could be dangerous, like you could be letting in a pedophile or a murderer into your Native American village, that may be true, but the opposite is the European way where like people just kind of come and go freely in and out of town. You don't know who's coming or going, right? Like, if a Native American back then would have just strolled into town, then everybody would have been looking at them, saying, who's this guy, what's going on? It seems like this is a safer way to go about things, because this automatically takes a stranger who enters your town without hollering at the borders first. It takes that person and puts a target on them, like, wait a minute, this person wasn't invited in, right? This seems like you could make an argument this is a much safer way to go.
Well, it is a safe way.
Okay. All right. Back to the natives. Usually ends with offers of service. If the strangers have occasion of guides or any necessaries for continuing their journey, and nothing is exacted for the entertainment. Nothing is exacted for the hospitality. Food, drink, roof and bed, tobacco. Nothing is exacted. What does that mean?
What is exact?
That's what you need to know to understand it. Payment. What's an exacto knife? Something that cuts something out, right? Exacting something is to remove something. Nothing is taken. Nothing is requested. Nothing is required. No payment is required. For the food, the drink, the hospitality, nothing is exacted. Doesn't seem like a really good economic model.
It's similar to Africa.
It's what?
It's similar to Africa.
It's similar in Africa? Why does this seem so weird to an American culture? Or to even the European culture back then? Go ahead.
American culture is individualistic.
It
We're
is.
all out for
Coming to this
ourselves.
country.
It is.
And,
We're all out for ourselves.
Where the Indians were more humble, towards each other, one to unite. And which is still you see today, when you compare Indian culture the Latino culture to American culture. That's different.
Does this seem like a more civilized way to treat someone? Because think about it, in the European towns, in the English establishments, you know, you walked into the bar, they probably wanted money first, right? Or they were going to ask you money for your food and your drink, or if you went to the inn, if you wanted a room, you had to pay. Probably up front in many cases.
He talks about the difference at the bottom of 247.
Bottom of 247? Like where it says...
Where's your money? If I have none, they say, get out, you Indian dog.
Yeah. So he's there. Here's the other side of the coin. Here's how the Europeans operate. You know, they want money, and if you don't have it, they tell you get out, and they insult you.
Because our mothers taught to us when we were children, and therefore it is impossible that we should be, as they say, free such purpose, or having such effect. They're only contrived the cheating of Indians in the price of beaver.
So their only goal is to exploit the Indians for what they have, not to provide hospitality. And it also seems like he's implying, or maybe even explicitly stating, that if a European traveler were to move from Native American village to Native American village, they would have given them the same treatment as the other Native Americans. So if a European English colonist went into a Native American village...
If a white man is traveling through our country, enters our cabins, we treat him as I treat you.
Yep.
Dry him if he is wet, we'll warm him if he is cold.
Right. So this hospitality is not only for people of that culture, but it's for people outside the culture, as far as the Native Americans go, which seems to be far more civilized, far more hospitable than the treatment that the Europeans give both themselves and people from outside cultures. And I think part of the answer is that the European model is an economically based model. Like, the people owned inns and owned bars and taverns because they wanted to make a profit. Like, our culture today seems to be very strongly based on an economic model, right? You all are mostly here not to just better yourselves as people, as individuals, but to eventually get a job, right? Correct? Our culture is economically based, which doesn't lend itself to the most civilized practices, right? I mean, the term survival of the fittest and capitalism, those are going to be points that come up throughout the semester, but even back then, this was a somewhat capitalistic society, at least the European version of it. So it depends what a culture values. The Native Americans seem to value hospitality. They seem to value people over money, whereas the Europeans valued money over people. At least going by Ben Franklin's depiction of the two different cultures. Does that make sense? All right. I guess that's all we have time for today for Franklin. Before you go, let me see if there's anything else I can help you with. Equiano. You need to know about his early life and details of his kidnapping. Equiano, early life and details of his kidnapping. Equiano again, examples of cruelty. Examples of cruelty in Equiano's narrative. We already discussed Jefferson last week, but there's a question about our discussion from last week on Jefferson. Franklin and taxes we talked about. Phyllis Wheatley, her poem. You need to know the theme or the lesson or potential lessons from Phyllis Wheatley's poem. Crevecoeur's thoughts from letter 9 on the southern colonies, his overall impression on the southern colonies. That's Crevecoeur. I think that's about it. There's some other stuff. There's some details from Crevecoeur you need to know too. Details on Crevecoeur. I can't give you any more information than that without giving it away. All right, we'll talk about it on Monday too.